Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. Welcome to People's Republic. My name is Brianna Griffith. This week I am going to be once again airing a part of a community forum. This one actually featured Gloria La Riva, the presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. She spoke in Dallas, Texas on this was Monday, October 26th. This was a little bit before the presidential election. Of course, there's a bit of a delay between the time I record an event and the time I'm able to air it. So, at this point, I don't really know, as I'm kind of recording this intro, I don't really know what kind of the political situation will be. So hopefully, I think a lot of the topics here still remain very, very relevant regarding political prisoners, regarding the geopolitics, regarding energy. All of the political issues, I think, are still absolutely relevant. So I'm kind of airing this out of, that sense of trying to inform the public about these issues more than anything else. I would have gladly, in the interest of political fairness, because, God forbid we not be quote unquote politically fair, whatever that means. In the interest of political fairness, I would have gladly covered community forums by Joe Biden or Donald Trump. I don't want to seem politically partial, but they did not do any community forums, of this particular nature. So I was unable to do so. And so I am covering Gloria La Riva's presidential, this particular leg on her presidential campaign, as she talked about the experiences essentially of socialist organizing. So again, this is, for all legal reasons, this is entirely for informational purposes. Anyway, this is Gloria La Riva of the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
It's really good to see you all here. We were originally planning to be here on Saturday to go out in the street in a park and do a lot of outreach to the community, talking to people, going door to door. And because we believe that the campaign is really about reaching to the communities to talk about the coming struggle. If they can vote, great. But as Comrade Dominique, and I really loved your talk, thank you so much. As he spoke, it's not the elections that will make change in this country. Anytime that politicians have signed a law that's brought some justice has been because the people were fighting back, organizing, whether it was fighting for civil rights, black liberation in the South against apartheid, or the struggle of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, the fight against the Vietnam War, and so many other things that we've been involved in. And it's an important message for people to know, because most people don't know our own history, don't know our history. It's hidden. It gets pounded into our head that you have to vote. If you didn't vote, you don't have a right to really comment on anything. You don't have a right other than just putting that piece of paper in the ballot box. And yet we have to consider that in this election, when there's so much, and we have seen, I've been to what will be 42 cities by November 3rd. Already I've been in more than 30 cities. It's almost every day that I'm in a new town. Thanks to all the comrades around the country who've been organizing all this year. And people do not feel like they're a part of the system. Today, even the New York Times reported that between a third, the tradition in the U.S. in elections since the 1960s is that between a third to half of the population that can vote doesn't vote because they have no interest in it, because they see it as the same every 4 years, because they're right. It is the same every 4 years, except in one aspect. It's getting worse for people. The poverty grows ever more, and the rich get richer, and the repression increases. Of course, we do know what an enormous development was and is the Black Lives Matter movement, the struggle against racist police terror, the struggle against white supremacy, because it's more than police terror, although that's a huge part of it, which was really sparked by the horrific execution of George Floyd. And I don't think that things can go back to what they were before, but certainly the level will not continue as it was in the early weeks after he was killed. But that's natural in the movement of demonstrations. And yet we see a lot of institutions being questioned. For the first time, actually, the majority of people in the U.S., maybe it was true also in the 60s, but the majority of people in the U.S., of course in the African-American community that's understood, but among white people and others, that racism is a problem, that police brutality against black people is a problem, and far more understanding of the situation. In fact, I've said lately that I really believe that a lot of people, millions of people besides black people, who feel this and live this every day, but millions of other people are thinking, this movement means something beyond fighting racism, in addition to fighting racism, that racism permeates all our lives, and that there's something in this struggle that is going to shake things up in America. Shake things up. It has to continue. And it has to continue with organization. So we are very, very glad in the Party for Socialism and Liberation that last August we chose and decided in a party congress that we would be in the elections this year, that we would run, that we would give it our all, and not to give any faith in the elections. We have condemned the United States capitalist elections as what they are. It's a dog and pony show between the Democrats and Republicans. But it's a very serious, calculated show. It's a mechanism for control. It's a mechanism to make sure that you only have two choices. The media knows this. We're talking about the national capitalist media. The media knows it. The politicians all know it. The corporations all know it. It's why they can easily switch from a Republican who's becoming very unpopular, like Donald Trump is right now, and start pouring their money into Joe Biden's campaign. Joe Biden's campaign is receiving millions and millions more. And did you know that as about a week ago, Joe Biden has spent $582 million on advertisement? And I don't know what Trump says. He gets a lot of free advertisements by the news covering him because he's so outrageous. That's what got him elected in 2016, I believe. He got endless coverage because, as the head of CBS said, it gives us a great deal of coverage in the news. But anyway, it's so locked up that even though we're on the ballot in 15 states, I think being on 10 states is really enough to warrant getting coverage. Being on the ballot in 15 states as we are, and 14 write-in, that the main newspapers will not cover us or the other third-party candidates. You don't know how many times we've been in these cities, in the street, talking to people, and they go, but wait, I mean, like, not only surprised, but you can't be on. There's only two. How come I never heard of you? How can that be? Like, how can that be? And they tell you, like, in Minneapolis, I was there on the Sunday, and I also was there on the next day and got the Sunday paper in Tampa where I flew to. And it's the voter's guide, big fat section, how to know what to vote on, the propositions, the candidates. It's got Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And that is a great disservice to the people. But I've been thinking about this. What if we were on the debate? What if we were on the two presidential debates that took place? First of all, we would call for reparations for the Black and Indigenous communities and describe what that means. I don't have to explain to the people who run this in beautiful, beautiful center, Pan-African Connection. And I thank so much Sister Akweja for letting us be here today, for the last-minute change from Saturday to here today to be indoors. I always feel at home. I love being here, and I want to recommend everyone, try to pick up a book. Try to pick up a history book out there, because there's so much wealth. I was looking at this great book. I want to buy it. I just bought 2 books. I want to get another one. About Black farmers. Speaking of reparations, Black farmers have been deliberately denied. It says in the back of that book that in 1940 there were 680,000 Black farmers. By 1974, there were only a little more than 44,000 from 680,000. Deliberate denial of loans, forcing them to get seeds like from Monsanto that are intended not to give you freedom to grow, except to be locked into their mechanism. This is the reason why, in addition to so many other things, the deliberate discrimination in jobs, the racism in jobs, schooling, employment, housing, healthcare. Most people don't realize that when the Social Security came about in 1935, most black workers did not qualify because they were agricultural or domestic workers for the most part. And it took years to be able to build up into the Social Security Fund. That when the GI Bill was passed, that lifted up many white workers who normally would never, the working class was never going to college before World War II. It was really exclusively for the rich, for the wealthy classes. But the GI Bill brought millions college education. That was really mostly for white workers. Very few black people enjoyed that who were veterans. And on and on and on, we could say so much more. But primarily the wealth that was built of this system, the system that allowed it to then take over the whole from coast to coast, commit genocide against Native people, steal the land, use enslaved labor to create what is today the richest capitalist country in the world. That's how it came about. And until we recognize this foundation of this country for what it is and the effects it has today, that with the exception of the civil rights movement and other struggles, provided some improvement, but it has slipped backward. It has really slipped backward. And why? In our party program, we have on the card of a shortened program, a 10-point program, we have here reparations for the black and Native communities. Stop police brutality, jail killer cops. There have been, I think, an average still of 3 killings a day by the police, mostly by gun, but also choking. We're familiar with some cases. And that was the average before. Since Mike Brown was murdered 6.5 years ago, 6,500 people have been murdered. You know, we grow up and we're hearing constantly, America, the best country in the world, USA, USA. It is number one. It's number one in pandemic deaths and illness. It's number one in the gap between rich and poor. By far the biggest gap between rich and poor in the industrial world. And number one in police killings. Even in England, we have a really very good article in Liberation News. Even in police killings, police shootings in England, from I think it was 2014 to 2019, it was a period of 5 years recently. Albuquerque, New Mexico had 27 police murders, mostly Latinos, Chicano youth. And of those 27 people murdered in that period of time, in the same 5 years in England, there were 3 shootings by police. We know how many there were in those 5 years. Some 5,000 in the United States. In England, 3. Of course, police are for the most part not armed, but in Germany, which the police are armed, there was like 1 killing. And yet we live in this most repressive, most racist country, and we think it's normal, or that's how it is, or you can't change it. But I think the struggle of Black Lives Matter shows things can change, and they will change, and they are changing. We need so much more, but we need organization. And being in the election this year, we think was a great feat. First of all, we plan to be on about 14 states. We got on in 15. It's the most that our party has ever been able to achieve in the time of pandemic. Our New Mexico comrades, they had to collect some 6,000 signatures. In 11 days, they collected 4,553. I don't know if you've ever done that before. Ask people to sign a petition to get a third party on the ballot. But it takes a lot of talking to people. Probably 5 people for every signature you get. 5 people walking by your table, and you have to ask every one of them, are you registered to vote? Can you help us get a third party? Can you help us get a socialist party? I mean, we just had to say socialist party right off the bat because people ask, what kind of a party? And so you might as well cut to the quick. And you know what? The acceptance was far greater this year. Far greater. And we had to shut down, though. They started March 1st in New Mexico. March 15, we had to close down. And for 3 months, we didn't do any petitioning in the country. We thought maybe we'll get on 4 states. But then with people coming out in the street because of George Floyd and the demonstrations and demonstrations, we said, you know, we can go in the street too. Of course, we were in the street with George Floyd's protests all over the country. We were already in the street, but we decided, let's do it. We're on in Arkansas, on the ballot, Arkansas, California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Florida, Illinois, New Jersey, Minnesota, New Mexico, Utah, Tennessee, Vermont, Louisiana. Did I say Colorado? Colorado, Washington State, 15. It really is remarkable. And I want to tell you a few stories. I've been with our members in the street. That's the work we do. If you don't get a card, you're not going to know we're running. That's how much of a challenge we have. If you don't get a card from us, there's no way you know we're on the ballot. You won't see it in the media. You won't see it on TV. You won't see it in newspaper. You will see it in alternative news. And I'm glad for our friends here who are covering this. Thank you so much. And it's important. That's how people are looking for alternate news. But very, very, maybe to 1% of the population. It's really outrageous, but that's the system we live in. And we've been going to the Walmarts. It was super cold in Minneapolis, so we went to the Mall of America, inside the biggest mall, I guess, in the world. It was ridiculous. But we were passing them out to people, and people were accepting them. And then we went to Walmarts all over, and in one Walmart, an older white woman in Columbia, South Carolina, I said, ma'am, she was a worker there. I said, ma'am, can I give you a card? I said, I'm a socialist and I'm running for president. We're a socialist party and we're on the ballot. You don't have to vote for Biden or Trump. And she said, socialist? Oh no, we can't have any more taxes. And I said, ma'am, if we had socialism, you wouldn't pay any taxes. You wouldn't pay taxes on your house. You wouldn't pay taxes out of your pay. And healthcare would be free. Education would be free. Everybody would have housing. I gave her a little rap, about how many millions of houses we have now. People could have houses now, even under the system, if we fought for it. Cancellation of the rents. I said, ma'am, nobody should have to pay for rent or utilities in this crisis. And no accumulation of debt. And she said, I like the way you talk. She didn't mean my style of talking. She meant what I'm saying. And you see, just a little bit of discussion breaks through the myths that people are told every day, that if you need things for the people, it means taxes. That if you're helping some people who need it, then it means those who actually need it too. You know she needs it. You know she's a low-paid worker. But we're made to think that, like, if someone else is improved in their life, it's going to hurt the rest of us. Or the idea of reparations. People go, I'm not paying for reparations. You'll hear white people go, I'm not paying for it. That was a long time ago. We're not saying you're going to pay for it. We have the same enemy, the capitalist, the same enemy of Amazon, which made $1 trillion. It's a $1 trillion company and paid no taxes last year. Or Apple, which now is a $2 trillion company and doesn't pay taxes. All those companies that are not only exploiting the workers, paying them so little that they can't even afford the things that they need, healthcare and housing, but also working night and day to keep the unions out, to keep workers from being able to organize. Did you know that in Amazon, which again didn't pay taxes, makes hundreds of billions of dollars, that when you work in the distribution center, before you start working, you have to sign a document saying that if your phone is ever caught on the floor, and by the way, when you go into work, you're not even allowed to have a turned off telephone on you, on the floor. If they catch you with it, they are allowed to confiscate it by the document you sign and have access to all your information. Why are they doing that? Because they want to know your life secrets? No, they want to know if you're organizing, because there are organizing efforts in that company. And someday it's going to win. Hundreds of thousands of workers, the largest employer in the world, besides temporary agencies, the largest employer. What does this show about capitalism, sisters and brothers? And why reform is not going to change it, but revolution. Why we believe in turning the system completely out and bringing in a new system with the people's power. Because the capitalists will never have enough. And as they amass their riches, their wealth, they also increase their political power. Absolutely. Why is it then that when Trump passed the new tax break for the rich, it took effect 2017, of 25% max, 25% maximum for the big corporations, that what really took place the next year for its effect was that all the top 400, top 500, Fortune 500 companies paid an average of 11%, not 25%, which is already extremely low, 11%. Because if you read the New York Times, it says, oh, the lobbyists started walking into the White House and saying, we want this exception, I need this exception for my company. So they actually lowered it lower than what they pushed down our throats. And people don't even know that. Not only do we not know about other candidates, we don't know about the laws they're passing. We don't know, for example, that with the issue of guns, and as a party, we believe that when there's gun control laws, they're used against people of color. Black people primarily, but people of color. They don't want people having guns. I believe there's too many guns. There's way too many weapons in this country. But having laws like this do not solve the problem. The problem is bigger than that. The solution is bigger than that. But anyway, getting back to what the companies do to change the laws in their favor is that from 1995 to 2004, there was a national ban, a federal ban on semi-automatics and, of course, automatic weapons for 10 years. But when it was lifted in 2004, the next year, a law was passed and signed under Bush that exempts all gun manufacturers from liability, meaning that when there have been these big massacres, Las Vegas, 58 people murdered, 20-something children, 5, 6, 7-year-olds in Sandy Hook, that the companies began pumping the sales mainly to middle-class white people who think they have to fear the rest of the population and arm themselves, because they have no liability. And when the families of Sandy Hook, the parents of these poor children, went to file a lawsuit, the court threw it out saying, oh, you can't sue them. They're exempt. That's capitalism. That's not about gun control. That's exempting the corporations. This is why with police brutality, and you would think that with a few of them being charged and convicted, these cops, that maybe they would slow down. They're not slowing down. They're not slowing down.
You are listening to Gloria La Riva, who gave this particular speech on Monday, October 26th, about a little over a week before the election. I am airing it now because there is, of course, a delay between the time I am able to record an event and the time I'm able to get to air having a weekly radio show. I just want to mention, again, in the interest of fairness that I am covering Gloria's campaign, particularly because she is the only one to have campaigned in publicly accessible community forums in Texas in this particular way. So yeah, I'm covering, just kind of what it is she had to say at this particular event. Again, this is a Party for Socialism and Liberation event that took place in Dallas on October 26th. And we'll return with the second half of Gloria here in just a second. So I hope you have been enjoying. And I just want to mention you are listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin, and it's also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. Welcome back to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith, and I'll launch us right back into the second half of this event with Gloria La Riva of the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Thank you for the question on nuclear energy. We don't usually get questions about that. At other times in the past, people have asked that, but it's not really a topic. And yet in our party Congress, which is the highest level of our party, when we have delegates from all the cities, depending on how many people we have in those cities. And we had our fourth party Congress last August. We'll have one again next year. It's actually much sooner than we thought. But there's been so many political developments with this year and so many more new members that we've had. The party's growing very quickly. But anyway, last August, that was one of the points for discussing our Constitution and our bylaws. And there was a lot of debate because people still, as you were saying, a way to assure not the use of fossil fuels, safer, but we really feel that it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous. Accidents are too permanent. The Fukushima and also the Chernobyl, which was very tragic. And you know that people still are getting sick today in Ukraine. And Russia too, because the clouds of nuclear radiation spread across Ukraine and Russia. And it's just too dangerous to even consider. We're not for the continued development of nuclear energy. On the issue of nuclear weapons, of course, we're for the complete unilateral disarming. Some people say, like, there are others in the movement who say, well, the U.S. and other countries should bilaterally disarm. That's already taken place before. But the Soviet Union developed its nuclear weapons because the U.S. was the only country still to use them against the people, a civilian population, a real act of genocide. And as a threat to the Soviet Union, it was a threat to the socialist camp. It was a threat to the world. This is the power that we have. And it's created so much danger. There's a real danger of nuclear war. And the nuclear weapons production has not stopped. In fact, it has been accelerated in recent years. Under Obama, a new program for developing a whole generation of nuclear weapons was created. And they describe it in the newspaper as dialed down. It's intended to make people think like, this use will be acceptable. And the scientists go, these new weapons are tactical. You can dial down the damage. No, it's nuclear. It's radioactive. It's massive. There's a reason they want it. There's a reason they want to develop those. And it's trillions and trillions of dollars. I'm from New Mexico, where all plutonium pits that go into the production of a nuclear bomb, they're all produced there at Los Alamos lab. And it has poisoned the waters with plutonium, which is a deadly element. In New Mexico, southern New Mexico, by the Great Carlsbad Caverns, for a number of years now, quite a few years, at least 20, they have the WIP program, which is where they store in underground caves the waste, the high-level radioactive waste from the Hanford Reservation. It's a Hanford plant, which is really a giant pit, an open-air pit It's the size of Manhattan, 40 feet deep. That's how big it is. Of radioactive waste has been poured into it. And they're saying that it's a danger of explosion, actually, because of accidents they've had there. But now they're shipping it to New Mexico. They're shipping it in trucks. And about 10 years ago, there was an accident that almost became a massive nuclear explosion. When the workers were told, they put them in barrels, which deteriorate after a number of years. But they were told, put inorganic material, and they put anorganic material. Get it? It was a verbal instruction. Inorganic versus anorganic. And it caught fire, and luckily some people got injured. But anyway, it's too dangerous to develop, and we're for eliminating the nuclear weapons entirely. First with the U.S., which is a real danger, which says that they have the right to use them against even non-nuclear countries. About Fidel Castro, what is it like meeting him? I met him the first time in 1992. And I had the great fortune of meeting him several times after, because I was invited, for example, to speak at the 1 million-person rally in Havana of May Day, because I had led a struggle for the little boy Elian, who in the year 2000 had been kidnapped by the right-wing Cubans in Miami. A lot of you are too young to know that, but it was the year 2000. And the right wing in Miami was intent on keeping him and washing his brain and turning him against his own country and his own father. So Fidel met the father, said this is a genuine man, and they did a whole nationwide struggle for 7 months till the boy came home. So because of that, the day that he was rescued by the FBI from that home, I was invited to go speak in Cuba. And so it's interesting because the night before May Day, they have a traditional TV roundtable discussion of international people. And I was on the show. And I had been given, before I came to Cuba that year, I was given a letter from Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's been in prison since 1981, wrongfully in prison, was on death row at that time. And Mumia had written a handwritten letter that I delivered to Fidel that night on TV, because Fidel would come to the studio to watch people. He was everywhere. Fidel was everywhere. And he came up to me and I gave him the letter and I said, Comandante, I said, this is a letter from a black African-American revolutionary who is facing execution. And Fidel immediately said, no, he's not going to get executed because Cuba is going to get involved. And so that night, I got in his car with him. We rode to his office, and he said right away, tell me all about him. And I told him about the fact there was no legal appeals left for him. And he said, well, then it means that we have to raise a political stake so high that they can't execute him. That was Fidel, ever the fighter. And he said, well, we're going to have a show about him. Who should be on? So I recommended some people, the lawyers, Leonard Weinglass, and other people. And he said, well, I want you on the show too. I said, okay. So we had the show, but the sad thing was that when we returned home, we got him the documentary about Mumia, and they translated it, subtitled it in Cuba, and showed it nationally on TV twice. And everybody saw it in the country. It's not like our reality shows that divert your attention from serious things. But when we returned, that May Day, by the way, that we spoke the next day, the U.S. Supreme Court, while they're celebrating May Day around the world, and especially in Cuba, Workers' Day, right? It's a holiday. The U.S. Supreme Court, because we don't have that holiday, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that day that Shaka Sankofa, the black young man who was on death row in Huntsville, Texas, they ruled he could be executed. The stay of execution was lifted. I had visited Shaka 4 years before in 1996. I have video because I videotaped him. And we visited and he talked about his life. He was 17 years old when he was falsely convicted of a murder that 7 witnesses said he wasn't the one. And one woman in a parking lot, dark parking lot, said that's the one. And because they wanted to get him, they used her testimony and refused the testimony of the others. Anyway, he was executed that June. We fought. We had demonstrations that day. We took over the streets. We got arrested that night. And by the time we got back, we had told Cuba about it. And they also discussed Shaka's case in Cuba. And Fidel sent a letter of condolence to the family and to the people on the day of his funeral when he was executed. Very tragic. But that's Cuba's view about fighting injustice, and especially in the United States. So that was my experience. I had dinner with Fidel a few times after that. It was always in the midst of a struggle. He was a genius. I mean, literally a genius, because he was always talking to people to provide lessons, always educating about what was going on in Cuba, talking about the world situation. You could always learn from him. His 5-7 hour speeches were not empty rhetoric. He would explain to people, for example, in 1993 to the Cuban population, how they had to introduce economic measures that were a step away from socialist construction, bringing in foreign investment, allowing developing tourism to the number one industry, because the Soviet Union had collapsed, had stopped trade with them, and Cuba lost 85% of their imports. So they had to find new means of income. And this is why Cuba has survived, because it is a socialist, revolutionary government and country, and a people who have been schooled and steeped in decades of solidarity with the world. It's why right now you have thousands of doctors who went immediately dispatched to dozens of countries in this pandemic of COVID. And before they went to West Africa to help save people from Ebola. They're always around the world, the Cuban doctors. And you know what? In the midst of this pandemic, where we don't have any national health care plan, where the U.S. is blockading Cuba and Trump has passed all kinds of measures against Cuba in the last days even, that the U.S. is trying to force countries to reject those Cuban doctors. No, you don't need those doctors. Let your people die. Just like our people are dying. Let your people die, because we want to kill Cuba. That's our government. And why, to me, Fidel is a hero. And he's a hero to millions. Whenever Fidel spoke at the UN, he would get a major ovation. Wherever he spoke in the world, thousands would come see him. Did you ever see that with George Bush? Did you see that with Trump? Besides the people who follow his stuff and need to wake up someday, you know? Anyway, that's a little, I should probably write a book about my encounters with Fidel. He was amazing. And he cared so much, to the littlest detail. There was, a number of years ago, there was a United Nations sponsored contest for little children. They were given a practice camera to go take pictures, of the world as they saw it. And in that contest, the children were able to get, as a little gift, they were all given these nice cameras, like a Nikon camera or something. But the Cuban child was denied a camera because of the U.S. blockade. They said, you can't get a camera because of the blockade of Cuba. And Fidel saw to it that he personally gave that little boy a camera. Talk about cruel. We have 226,000 people today who are dead. And of 226,000 people, how many were mothers and fathers, grandparents? For the most part, they're older. How many families have lost a loved one on whom they depended in their family? How many children no longer have their loved one, or spouses, or siblings? What a cruelty. And all the 7 million Americans who've been sick, half are African American, half are in residence homes. And if you go in the hospital, these 2-3 months when you're in a coma, or a month, or even 2 weeks, you end up with hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a lot of people don't have health care. I mean, we are in the worst situation of anyone in the world because it's all there to solve the problem. Are those the two questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Do people have any comments or anything? Like, what would we do if we had power? We'd free all the political prisoners immediately, give them restitution. You know, the thing about prisoners, they really, those who labor and more would accept work if they were paid right, they should be given prevailing wages. Why not? Why is their labor less valuable than others? Why, if you're fighting fires in California as they are, my brother was one of those firefighters, why should they not get paid what all the other firefighters get? You know, fortunately, Governor Newsom signed a law saying that now they can become firefighters. Before they were prohibited. That's an important step. But to get 20 cents an hour, to do work, to work on computers, to do the production that they do, and then when they leave, because, you know, with those small pennies, maybe they can buy some extra food. It's just minimal. They can't save money. And if you save money for 20 years, you made $500. No, you should be able to walk out of there to go rent an apartment. You should be able to get out of there to buy some clothes. To be able to, like, have a way to live until you get a job. It's just hundreds of thousands leave prison. And they're just ruined. We were on our campaign trail, we were in New Haven, Connecticut. It was a very cold day. It was unusual because it got warm again. We had a rally in the street and a lot of homeless people were coming up and, you know, adding a lot of their insight. And one man, very happy looking guy, Puerto Rican, he had just gotten out of prison and he said, you know, he just told us his story. It was cold. He didn't have a jacket or a sweater. I said, aren't you cold? He goes, I don't have anything. He had a little bag. He came out with no money at all. And I said, where do you sleep? He said, well, every night I look for new cardboard boxes and I take them out behind the theater to sleep. And he'd been trying to get help from social services. This is a story of millions, of veterans of war, veterans of the military. And do you know the fastest growing population of homeless vets is Black women? It's a quickly increasing number is Black women veterans who are homeless. In Los Angeles, it reported in the news that last year in LA County, 960 people died who were homeless. Think of the number. It's almost 1,000 people in the street. It's like 3 bodies every day in the streets. I mean, that's a shocking number. And this year, at the end of September, 9 months into the year, 3 months left to go, 960 people dead who are homeless. Winter's coming. Chicago, Gary, Indiana, New York City, Detroit, the whole Northeast, and the South as well. Can you live outside?
No.
Could any of you live outside?
No.
Do you ever imagine what it would be like to be outdoors? To find a place, and if you're a woman, to be fearful you might get attacked? But anybody. I mean, you'd have to have like an Arctic tent and an Arctic sleeping bag to live outside, but people don't because they get their stuff confiscated by the cops.
Yeah.
And the numbers are going to grow, sisters and brothers. I'm sure you think about this, but let's think about it now. That at least 50 million people have not been able to pay their rent. What is it like in normal times? If you're 5 days late, you can get evicted, right? Yeah. If you're 5 days late, the landlord can begin it, and you are out. I don't care if you find that money later. My husband and I have paid for our building where we live of 10 apartments. We've paid for it twice with our rent of 37 years. If we're late 5 days, we're evicted. But 50 million people, as estimated, haven't been able to pay their rent. And those landlords are waiting. They've already begun the process, even though the moratorium still exists. They're already evicting people illegally, or they're waiting. Do you think these landlords are going to say, well, I know this is a special time? Do they? Do landlords do that? No. Maybe someone who owns a house and knows somebody. But generally, no. And so just the way capitalism works, the way Amazon is just devouring everything it can from the workers, pays no taxes, and plans to get more from the workers, keeps the union out. The same with the landlords and real estate developers. And the banks, which is the foundation of the whole problem. The banks are the ones who finance capital. The banks are the ones who decide if a whole factory shuts down because the board of directors aren't getting enough profits for the shareholders. That's the rule. And so the same way that we see the monopolization of the capitalists and the poor get poorer, it's going to accelerate in this crisis. In this crisis, people will come out even poorer by the tens of millions. And middle-class people who never thought they'd be in that situation, I really think that the vast majority of people in this country will appreciate and sympathize with any economic struggle developing. If we take on the landlords in a big way, the party started April 25 and May 25. That was the day that George Floyd got murdered. April 25, May 25, we had national caravans to cancel the rent and the mortgages, including small business and small landlords. Do you pay rent? Okay. We mean people like you. We mean millions of small business. 266,000 restaurants have shut down. They're small. They're neighborhood. They couldn't hold up. But the big ones, McDonald's, Starbucks, and the other big ones you can think of, they're growing. They've got more profit. So the monopoly grows and everybody else gets ruined. The petty bourgeoisie, the small business gets ruined. And why we are in alliance. 2 instances on the same day in New Mexico. Santa Fe. We didn't go to the rich part. It's a rich town. We went to the poor part. And I spoke to a native woman. And I said to her, ma'am, we have a card. We're on the ballot in New Mexico. You can vote for us. We say, cancel all rents and mortgages. She goes, but I'm a landlord. I have a little property and I have a house that I rent out. I said, we say, small landlords too. She goes, oh, good. She goes, because I am a socialist. People have a fear about how am I going to get affected? And when you say, we're all in this together. Was it yesterday? Where was I? Yeah. Houston. Yeah. In Houston, we went to the neighborhoods. About 40 of us were there. We had our rally. We said, come on, let's go out. Everybody grab cards, grab a paper, grab a sign sheet. Let's go into the neighborhood. We went door to door. And a young white man, pretty hip-looking guy, comes to the door. And we said, hi, we're running, and cancel the rents and mortgage. He goes, but my dad's a small landlord. We said, we showed him this. And he said, great. He says, because my dad's renting to me right now. And he said, and I'm a socialist. I'm telling you, this is no exaggeration. He says, I wasn't going to vote for anybody. I figured I'd just pick some third party. And now you're it. I said, we are third party in Texas. We are a write-in. And then 2 doors down, we met a young black man and his friend. They had just moved there from New Orleans. And he said, I needed a new opportunity. I came to Houston. We talked to him. He really liked this. And a few minutes later, he came to the park where we were and said, I want to join your party. We're getting that everywhere. We were in Columbia, South Carolina. Did I talk about the water thing? No. It's Columbia, South Carolina. And there was a man with a really, those small neighborhood. It was in a black community, very, very poor. And we saw 3 households. And all their belongings were in the street in the yard, piled up. TV, furniture, a bunch of stuff that they had just abandoned because now they're evicted. They're not going to another apartment. They're going to the street. So they can't carry their household belongings. And so 3 households were having their belongings bulldozed up into a trunk to go get them. This is just the start. And we went to this barber shop because they had said, oh, they want to meet you, Gloria. I said, good, let's go. This black little store owner, we're talking to him, and he's like, this is good. And we said, the water situation. We're meeting people who can't pay the water. He goes, tell me about it. He goes, my tenants can't pay, and I can't pay the water bill. And we're going to get turned off. And we said, water is life. They tell us, wash your hands for 20 seconds. Wash your hands, wash your hands. How do you drink water if you have, can you imagine in your house no water? You'd probably happen when they were repairing your apartment. And you forget, oh my God, I can't flush a toilet. Oh, I got to go get some water. This is every day. In Detroit, tens of thousands when the pandemic started were shut off already. People who live like this normally, in normal times. And these water companies, after a short moratorium in Arkansas, they're now turning people's water off. And Missouri. And so we were in South Carolina. Then we walked. He said, let me give you my name. I said, if we do something on this campaign, which we will, we'll get back in touch with you. And then we met this young man with a bunch of his friends. He saw the card. He said, I've been in prison 5 years. I just got out. And now I have to owe restitution. I'm being garnished. And we talked about the water. He goes, I owe $2,100 on my water bill. I have to pay $400 to keep getting cut off. And he said, and all my neighbors, he goes, the water bill's gone sky high. We have hundreds of dollars that we owe. Something's happening. What is it? It's that the cities are finding themselves broke because they're not getting business tax or payroll tax, right? Because of the shutdown. They're finding ways to push it on to people. They're cutting bus service. San Francisco, the famous subway station, the Muni line, they said about 3 months into the pandemic, we're going to have to cut 75% of the buses. In San Francisco, all the cities are saying this. We have to cut bus service. The money's there. Why do you use the bus? You go to work. You make them a profit. You go shopping. You make them a profit. You go to school because you have to. It's a social service. Water should be free like the fire department. You don't pay to get your fire put out in your neighborhood. It should be free. So anyway, these ideas we're bringing forth, and we're not going to stop with the campaign. After the election, and by the way, with the election, we're going to all be watching. I know you'll all be watching, right?
Yeah.
You're going to all be like until the middle of the night finding out what is going on. Is Trump going to get defeated? Is he going to refuse to leave the White House like he said? Is there going to be a battle? He's called on the Proud Boys and other fascists to stand back, stand by. We have to be ready. We got to be ready with mass action. Massive, peaceful, but militant action. Whatever the outcome may be. Whatever the outcome is, we will be there in Washington with the counter-inaugural. Because we're not going to be satisfied with a Biden if he wins. Right. We're not going to be satisfied with a majority Congress Democrat, right, House and Senate, and a president, if that happens. Because Biden says we need fracking. Biden says we need to give the police more money. No, we don't. We need to defend them. And Biden's responsible for a lot of the mass incarceration. Right. And Biden's a capitalist. Mr. MasterCard. He comes from the state of Delaware, where 2/3 of all corporations, that's where they're chartered, is in Delaware, because there are no income taxes in Delaware. There are no corporate income taxes. He's a senator from Delaware. Anyway, we're going to fight.
All right, so we have to wrap it up there. That was the last section of the speech, as well as the Q&A session from Gloria La Riva, who was the 2020 presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. This particular speech was given in Dallas, Texas, on the October 26th. Before a crowd at a venue there called the Pan-African Connection. So yeah, I covered Gloria, just sort of interest for the general political issues here. I know there's a bit of a delay. I know at this point the election has happened, so please excuse the difference between or the time difference really between like when this was recorded and produced and when it was uploaded. This is a weekly show, so sometimes things have that bit of a delay. I hope that everything is really still relevant here. I think a lot of the political issues that are being discussed are certainly still relevant. So thank you for tuning in, and we will be back next week with another. For now, I'm covering community forums and other webinars, and so I believe the next webinar is going to be on Cuba. Once again, and the intensification of the blockade on Cuba. So stay tuned, and we'll have that next week. That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.